Hi, I'm Rigger. This is Your Rant, and today we are going to continue reviewing The Path of the Avatar. Before that though, be sure to like the video if you like it, share it if you think others would like it, let me know any thoughts in the comments down below, and subscribe if you want to see more. Now, last time was pretty rushed, but it was all to set up this big two-parter finale. So, without further ado, and without wasting any more time, let's just get into the episode. So I will see you on the other side. Alright, and that was The Siege of the North Part 1. That was really good. Back on track. Like I said, the last episode was not bad at all, but you could feel how rushed they were. But the rush was put in place to get to this two-parter, so it had me excited. As I've said before, my real only frame of reference for most of this series is the movie, because it's just what I've seen, and I know, it's not considered, great or anything, and I didn't think so either, but obviously this is the climax of that as well, so because of that, it is one of the things I can more remember about the film as well, without obviously wanting to rewatch it. And so I can compare some of this to that, which is interesting because it shows really where they let down a lot of the potential that they had with that film, despite how rushed the whole thing was. But anyway, this is not a review of the movie, we'll go into the story of the episode. We start off with Katara, who has excelled in her training and is beating pretty much everybody, which is interesting, but, protagonist powers, she's really good, that's fine. We roll with that, especially in children's shows. She's exceptionally gifted, we just roll with it. But it does mean that her, quote-unquote power level overall for the show has gone up, which will come into play. And more than that, I'm interested how it's going to come into play in the future past this finale. I'm hoping that, in general, they, are consistent with how strong she is, and that when we get to next season, she doesn't just reset back to sort of okay, but not as good as she is in this episode. But we also addressed that not only is she obviously excelling with her commitment and how much she's wanting to learn and how enthusiastic she is and how driven she is, but also Aang is also excelling because of natural talent, which is something we've covered before with, his lineage and heritage and the avatars backing him up. It just works that way. But then we cut over to what I was really wanting, which was Princess Yue and Sokka. So I said before that, they were very, very rushed in how they did that, and it felt really hollow, and I was hoping we got to see a little bit more of them, and they do that here, which is great, because it was really needed. Obviously, I'm not going to be too surprised about what happens to her, but I am very interested in how we build up the connection with her leading up to that finale. Here we see a really good mix of Sokka being his charming self and, being a lovable dork, but also very charming and innocent and just straightforward, which seems to be everything the princess is looking for, and you can feel their chemistry immediately. They do a really good job of making up for the last episode, where they were very stilted and their conversation was almost non-existent, honestly. But here they get on really well, and we have immediate blushies, and we have a real connection that comes up pretty quickly. They go out flying on Appa, and they are getting to know each other quite well. But they notice a sky full of ash. And Sokka, of course, immediately knows what that means. And not only that, but the princess does bring up multiple times that they can't be doing this, this is not okay. They almost kiss again, and it's clear that she is very resistant to the idea, but her feelings obviously are the other way. From there, we briefly head over to Zhao, who is talking with Iroh, talking about how great their victory will be, and Iroh warns him that history isn't always kind to people, and things don't always go the way you want, and he makes fun of him for the Ba Sing Se stuff we've heard about, and that, it won't go that way. As well as we see Iroh talk to Zuko and just check, hey, you got a plan yet? And he's working on it. Back over at the Water Tribe, again, the princess reinforces they can't do this, and she says we can't see each other anymore because we feel this way, I feel this way, and we can't feel this way, so we can't pretend that we're just going to be friends. We got to drop it because I have a responsibility. She makes it very clear that it's for her father, it's for her people, this is how things are, these are the traditions, and she can't just break them because of how she feels. Once they head to a meeting of everyone when they are going to discuss what's happening, the leader of the Water Tribe brings up that he has a very dangerous mission for people to go on, and Sokka, being very down and seeming to not sort of care what's going on, decides, no, I'm going on the super dangerous deadly mission. And they talk openly that people will not return from this. Not only will they be losing people in this battle in general, but people going on this trip, they are sure not all will return. From here we get the first moments of Siege, where flaming projectiles are launched from a lead boat to start impacting the wall and landing in into the city. Aang and Appa head out to start disabling the ships, and they get pretty cool fight scenes. Less centered around the combat itself, and more inventive ways for Aang to disable the many catapults on the ship and avoid being stuck and attacked. It is pretty effective and pretty cool, but despite Appa coming in super clutch, they head back to the skies after some assistance from some other waterbenders out on some small ships, but they see the massive invasion force coming. Back on the preparations for the super secret mission with Sokka, we learn that they are heading out to try and defeat the leader of the Fire Nation. But it's clear that the Water Tribe is very out of the loop. They don't know who the leader is, they don't know his name, they don't know what he looks like. They plan to infiltrate using Navy uniforms, but they have 85-year-old uniforms that are well out of date, and Sokka lets them know all of this. It's also here when we meet Han, who is the person leading this mission. He is a young and arrogant man. He's very resistant to everything Sokka says, despite Sokka clearly being in the loop. But he is quickly shut down and told to listen to Sokka as he starts telling them, that his name is Zhao, he looks like this. The uniforms don't look like this anymore, etc, etc. And it's also here where we learn that, of course, Han is the one who will be marrying Yue. From here we return back to the Fire Nation armies, and Iroh informs Zhao that he should stop for the night because the moon is rising and the waterbenders draw their power from the moon. Attacking during the night would be a terrible mistake. Interestingly, Zhao says he has a plan to deal with this moon problem, but for now he will agree and they halt their ships. From here, Iroh goes and talks secretly with Zuko, and asks Zuko what he's going to do. Zuko doesn't have the strongest plan, but he's basically going to sneak out on a ship alone, under cover of night, and try and make his way into the city himself. A one-man, small, hard-to-detect infiltration. Which is nice because we've seen his talent with such things when he was the Blue Spirit. And we get a nice heart-to-heart here where Iroh talks about how he's lost his son, and ever since he really does think of Zuko as his own. They actually share a really nice moment and embrace, and then Zuko heads off on his own, and Iroh reminds him that his fire breath could save him. It's also during this time where we return to Aang, who is very much struggling. He lands and says he can't do this. He's disabled so many ships, but there is so many more. He may be the Avatar, but he's just one kid, and he can't keep this up. From there, we return to Sokka and Han is basically bragging to Sokka about how great Yue is, and he lets it be known in no uncertain terms that also the political gains here is what's important. Basically talking super confidently and talking about how, she's a real catch and all, but actually I'm, getting political power with her father and, there's more to this. Sokka is of course immediately offended by this and it doesn't take long for it to devolve into a fist fight. However, Sokka is taken off the mission and then they head out. Aang talks to Yue saying that he has no way to win this, and they talk about how the Water Tribe is run, or the Water People in general, sort of run by a combination of the spirit of the moon and the spirit of the ocean. That the water and the moon work together to maintain their people. It's here where they strike up an idea that Aang might be able to talk with those spirits, as it is something he can do, he can cross over. And Yue says she has an idea and takes them to the most spiritual place in the tribe. It is a hidden, lush, green shrine, where there are some very much not important, totally don't worry about it fish. Aang crosses over into the spirit world. We don't see what he sees yet, and Katara and Yue stand by to watch over him. During this time, we see Zuko execute his infiltration plan, which is very risky. It involves him sneaking up to the gate without really much of a plan, but once he's there, and he got away from being spotted with basically luck, he then spots the seal turtle things that are around and notices them heading down a hole and says, well, they are coming up for air somewhere else, so he decides to follow them by literally just swimming. I like that they address how cold this water must be. It is something they haven't really addressed until now, but yeah, this thing would be freezing, and he struggles making his way through some underwater caves. His fire breath does indeed save him as it helps warm him, but eventually, after his long infiltration, he actually finds his way to the shrine. We see briefly here that the chief, the head of the tribe, has actually taken Sokka off the mission to go and personally guard Yue, just in case. At the shrine, Katara is expositioning to Yue about how the spirit world works and that they shouldn't move his body because that's his way back. And unfortunately, right now, is when Zuko appears. And it's here where they have quite an excellent fight, and it was one of those things that stood out to me where it's like, I remember what this was in the movie, and it was 2 moves, 1 each. Here, it's an excellent exchange between the two. Zuko comments on how good she has gotten and that she must have found a master to train her. And she puts up a serious fight and actually almost stops Zuko. Unfortunately, however, it is time for dawn. And as the moon goes down and the sun comes up, the firebenders get better, the waterbenders get worse. Thus, this leaves Zuko able to overpower Katara, knocking her out and taking Aang, who is still completely immobile and in the spirit world. You can see him glowing. He's not here presently. And our episode ends as Sokka arrives to protect Yue, finding no Aang and a knocked out Katara. The Fire Nation ships land and start smashing through the wall as foot soldiers start heading in, and we cross to Zuko, who still has the completely helpless Aang, but has somehow made his way out up onto the tundra, heading somewhat blindly into just the snowstorm, which doesn't sound like a good idea, but that's where we are. That recap was already very long, but I do have a few more notes about the episode. Real quick, I really wanted to say how cool Appa is here. He really showed off. Awesome. Despite the non-lethal combat we see, the ships get frozen and the people just get knocked out, and mostly Aang disables their war machines, they still talk very openly about a lot of death, and it always is something in this show that strikes me. I think just because things have changed quite a bit. It's weird to get even a mention of people dying, let alone a council talking about how I am looking at all your faces because some of them won't be returning. Like, that's pretty dark. As is the idea of someone like Sokka taking basically a suicide mission because he's mad and doesn't know how to feel, with the response of Yue crying when she realizes what he's doing. We also have a pretty good question in here, which is, yeah, we're not supposed to like Han, and we pretty much code him as someone that isn't likable, but he does mention, what do you know about our politics? What do you know about how things work here? Who are you to judge? And it is not an unfair point. Like, he talks about how great Katara is doing, but again, they're only training Katara. They haven't totally changed their ways, which was a note from the last episode, and that's fair. But he does talk as almost if they're thinking about it, like, oh, look how great she is. She shows how great you could be. Which, despite the positive message of everyone is equal, does come up as like, I don't know if that's a good thing that they should change those traditions. It's like, it's hard to explain, it's quite a complicated issue when you have traditions that seem sexist or seem in any way really out of date with modern culture, but you can frame it as, oh, those things need to be changed, but you can also frame them as, well, some of them are tradition and some of them need to be respected. Because we can say, well, Aang hates that you're not training women and, this tradition stinks, screw you guys. But Aang will just as strongly fight for his traditions at his temples and so forth that he sees as right. It's always a tricky thing to talk about, well, this tradition has things one way, but, we would think the right thing, quote unquote, is a different way. Do you change them because you think that's more fair and you think that's how things should be, or do you not change them because traditions should be respected, because you'll fight to have your other traditions respected? Now, for now they're not going into it that deeply, but it is a real issue that they sort of are touching on here, and I would be interested to see what their resulting answer would be. Because, as we all know in the real world, there are not clear answers to these questions and people fight over them constantly. It's a similar thing they bring up with Yue. She clearly feels one way, and we're meant to sort of side with, oh, she should, abandon her fiancé and go with her feelings, because that's what we as storytellers and we in like a, idyllic world would think is the right thing to do, and that's what's best. But maybe a political marriage is what's best in the terms of these people, in this real world. We don't know. We've talked a lot in this show, or we have brought up a bit in this show about Aang's duty, and the duty people have sometimes. That it might be unfair, and it might not be what we always want, but sometimes we need to do it. And I know that the ending to this will mean they don't have to answer that question. I thought that was interesting going in. I'm like, oh, I know what's going to happen to Yue, so they actually don't really have to resolve this, which almost feels like a get out of jail free, but in the worst way possible, like, oh, it's a sad ending. But they're not going to answer this question totally. But I suppose in a way they are, because it's going to be another thing about responsibility and doing the right thing. So we'll get to that next episode, I'm sure. But yeah, I am really impressed with some of these very adult themes and adult ideas they're bringing into this that a lot of adults don't have the answers to. Most adults don't have the answers to. But these are real issues, and it's quite an interesting thing to see in what is essentially a kids' show. So more compliments to them for bringing this up at all. But I think for now that'll do it. We ended up on some nice cliffhangers, and that's what I thought it would be. If you have a two-parter, the first part's going to be setting up all the ending. Initially that had me worried because the last episode was so quick and so fast-paced to set this episode up, that if this episode was then just more set up for the last episode, it might not be that satisfying, but they did a pretty good job here. So, impressive stuff. That's part 1. Part 2 next week. We'll see how it goes. Until next time, my name is Rigger. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope I did alright.